Right. So we can't talk about Western Hemisphere and specifically Latin America without talking about the environment. Okay. It's known for the environment. And the environment in this part of the world is incredibly important. Um, so we're going to briefly talk about this. Some of the stuff may be review. Some of it may be new to you. The specifics probably are new to you. So let's go ahead and get started. You'll get your notes for the human imprint on the environment, and we'll go from there. Okay, so let's review what globalization is. Okay, and we've talked about this before with the Columbian Exchange, with trade agreements. So this is just that increased interconnectedness, right? We have easy access to things. Things are cheaper, not as far as food is concerned, but things are cheaper to find flights to go places. We have companies like Temu and Shein that can get stuff rapidly from China. So lots of connectedness, and that wasn't the case 40 years ago. Okay, so excuse me. So anyways, so you do need to know those aspects of trade. Okay, trade and transaction is a piece of it. Capital investments, all right, and the movement of investments from country to country across the globe, and then migration of and movement of people is part of that globalization, bringing their ideas, bringing their foods, their culture, and then the spreading of that knowledge, all of which are all parts of diffusion. Okay, so in your notes, you should be defining what globalization is, and then when we talk about what two areas experienced major advancements that led to increased globalization, okay, that's down at the bottom here, right? So when does it begin? We really kind of trace it back to Columbus, but they were doing that before Columbus. He's just the guy that gets the oh, what do you call it? The notoriety for it. Um, but they've been doing that before then. Vikings were doing the traveling before Columbus did, but nothing is as great as Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. I mean, that rhymes, so it's easy to remember. But the year but recently it's been these two things. It's been communication technology and transportation technology. So when we're talking about those things, transportation technology, and don't just skip over this part because there's no spot for you to put it in your notes, okay? Transportation technology changed when they created refrigerated cars, when they created containers that we see on these huge ships, ocean-going vessels, that never used to be. I mean, Titanic is known for a lot of things, but it was one of the first ships that could carry that many people across the ocean. So just the types of ships, the types of containerization, the fact that we can get tulips that are known for over in Holland and the Netherlands over to the United States in record time and fresh. Bananas, the same thing. So the fact that we can get food from all over the world and it still be fresh by the time we get it here in the United States or any other place is because of how we've developed containers, right? To haul that stuff and transportation of trucks and things like that. So that stuff is super important and the only reason why we operate the way that we do now. Before that, we didn't have access to it, and if we did, we were one of the wealthiest people. The wealthiest were able to get access to some of that stuff a much earlier than the rest of us. But now everybody can have it. All right. The next piece here is talking about how that globalization has impacted the environment. Okay. It's created soil pollution, right? Where chemicals have been thrown into the soils, resulting in harmful water, right? That's one of the biggest pieces is stuff that's been put into the soil that leaks into the water system. So we've had issues with that. The fresh water, that chemical waste that's been dumped into rivers. And then ocean water, of course, with plastics and everything else that's dumped. And there's just not a lot of, like, once you get out beyond the shores of countries, there's not a lot of policing that happens out there, right? Other than people that are running their vessels and companies that are running their vessels that have rules and regulations that they're hoping that their people follow, right? Other than that, there's not a lot of policing. There's not a lot of policing in some countries that has shorelines along the ocean, right? So some of these less developed countries and the United States, so it's all countries, it's not just less developed countries, but some of these countries don't have rules and regulations or don't follow rules and regulations about where to put their waste, okay, and how to get rid of their waste. And even the United States is guilty of taking their e-waste, which is your computer waste, your cell phone batteries, your all of those things that are broken and busted and stuff like that, and shipping it, literally shipping it to countries that don't have laws and regulations to burn it. And when you burn things like that, you end up having these huge like it's like not good for you. It's not good to burn batteries and all that kind of stuff. Like putting that stuff up in the air, not okay. And so at any rate, so it's not just less developed countries, but oftentimes those countries don't have rules and regulations that are followed as well as possibly you would have more in your core countries. And so because of that, a lot of core countries will find ways to ship. And I say countries, companies within the core countries will find ways to ship their stuff elsewhere to get rid of it. All right. So we've got freshwater issues, ocean water, goods and things and plastics and tearing up of our ecosystems in the water. And then, of course, air pollution, right? The increased transportation alone from opening up the borders between Mexico and Canada back in 1994 when they created NAFTA, which was the North American Free Trade Agreement, now called the USMCA. It was where they said, hey, we're not going to tax each other. We're going to open up the borders and we're going to start making goods more freely available between our two countries and Canada, right? But the bigger benefit is between us and Mexico. And so they did that, but that means that's why you see so many 18-wheelers all over the place, right? Because they're transporting things. And so because of that, we've now increased our air pollution, and cars are more readily available. And so that's increased our air pollution and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so the environmental impacts of globalization. All right, this is the encroachment of land. And that simply means you've got a pocket of land that has not been touched by humans, and now you end up with a like it's shrinking, right? That's the encroachment of land that's being used for other things. All right. So obviously the things that fall under encroachment of land is deforestation, the cutting down of trees, and then the converting of rainforest to farmland, right? You can't go back. I say that, 100 years from now, if we were to say we cut out a piece of rainforest and farmed it for a little bit and then left it alone, probably 100 to 200 years from now, it would probably start looking a little bit more like a rainforest. Like surprisingly enough, Mother Nature has a way of regrowing. Like if humans were to vanish from the planet tomorrow, the concrete would be eventually overtaken by plants. Okay. And so I do think that you could reclaim it eventually, but that's if you completely left it alone by humans, and that's really difficult for us to do. So converting rainforest to farmland and then not really doing anything else with it, right? The rainforest soil, all right, it's not suitable for farming. So they clear the land, they burn it. That's that slash and burn agriculture. And then those nutrients left behind by the burn is what they use to grow stuff. But the problem is that it only lasts for a couple of seasons. And because of that, then they have to keep moving. And that's the problem. They'll farm on it for 3 to maybe 5 or 6 years. And then they keep moving, right? They'll cut down another swath of rainforest and they'll keep moving. And that is problematic because that doesn't mean it's growing in behind them. It just means they continue to, and as people continue to flock to the cities, those cities start to spread out, and then you end up with more and more land taken up and never going back to rainforest, right? And then, of course, that depletion of the ozone, right? Very difficult. We talk about it all the time now. 30 years ago, it was more of when I was your age, it was more of a, well, we think this is probably going to give us a problem. And now it's kind of like, okay, we're seeing larger storms in the Gulf. We're seeing stranger weather patterns, longer winters or shorter winters and longer summers, hotter summers. And there's a little bit of that ebb and flow of natural, like it's naturally this kind of way. But there's a lot of data that says our human impact is having is wreaking havoc on our global climate, right? Okay. So here we go. Amazon rainforest. You should know this before. Maybe you've talked about this before. Just a couple of nuggets, right? 670 million. This is just a large number. 670 million hectares, okay? Which is larger than Western Europe. All right. So think France and Germany and Spain and all of those countries combined, okay? Of northwestern, covering much of northwestern Brazil and extending into Colombia, blah. It's huge. It's massive. All right. And over the last 50 years, it's shrunk by 17%. So it's an alarming rate at which they are deforesting the Amazon. Okay. A very alarming rate. And so here's what it looks like, right? We should be on our backside of our notes, okay? So you've got the biodiversity. You should know this from maybe science, right? Refers to the wide variety of species in one region. And here's the thing, there's so many things that's not been discovered in the Amazon yet. Like there's places they haven't even been. And up until the 1970s, there was an actual tribe that had not been discovered by humans. Into the 1970s. That's how dense the rainforest is. They did not know other people existed up into the 1970s until they were discovered by, I can't remember who. Okay, I'll try to go look it up. But wild, right? Wild that we're into the 1970s. Almost all of the world by then has been discovered by something, all of the islands, yada, yada, yada. And we got a tribe hanging out there that don't even know that airplanes can fly, right? So your biodiversity, okay, it holds half of the world's plants and animals. That's bananas. Half. Okay, and about 2/3 of those plants we haven't even cataloged yet. Again, that should be alarming that we're destroying things that we don't even know exist. Okay. The water, Amazon produces, stores, and filters water, which helps protect against soil erosion, floods, droughts. Okay, because of the canopy. Like if you've ever been in a rainforest, even in the rainforest in Costa Rica, you can stand underneath trees and it could be almost pouring down rain and you get dripped on. Like it filters everything, right? And I know that because I was in Costa Rica in a rainforest and we hardly ever got wet once we were underneath the canopy. It was damp, sure, but it wasn't wet, like you weren't getting completely poured on. And then medicinal use, all right, for medicine. Many of the plants in rainforest are used to make medicine, including cancer drugs. That's kind of important. Those are the things, those are the big ticket items that we're trying to tackle, right? Wouldn't it be amazing if we could tackle all of those cancer things that wipe out loved ones before their time, right? Or some drug that helps with Alzheimer's. I would have loved that for my mother. My mother passed this last summer and she struggled for 6 years. We watched her decline. That's just not easy. It's not easy on any planet. Is that easy to watch your parent pass away like that? Okay. And so I would love to have some kind of something that solves that problem because it is a horrible disease. Get me a little teary-eyed. All right. So, and that's, maybe it's in the Amazon, maybe something that will help Alzheimer's patients is there, right? And what if we're destroying that? What if we're destroying our chance to fix that problem? Carbon absorption. All right. Rainforest trees absorb the carbon, they release the oxygen. You know that. Okay. So kind of an important place. All right. And then the other piece that we have here, I've already defined these things for you. All right. So sustainability, I want you to make sure that you understand the difference between conservation and preservation. Okay. So let's look at sustainability first. All right. It's the practice of using natural resources responsibly, meaning that we are doing it in a way that makes it available for the next generation, for you guys, for your kids, for your kids' kids, right? So how do we do what we're doing now? How do we've already grown to this point. It's kind of like opening up Pandora's box. We already have all this transportation. We already have this mindset of we must have a car. Everybody's got to have a car, especially in your core countries. It's not that way in all of the world, but especially here in the United States. So how do we move forward and care about the fact that maybe we should recycle better? And if you've been to Europe, I've said this a dozen times. If I've said it once, they do recycling better there. Okay. And so it makes me think every time I go, how can we bring this back? And how do we make this better for us? How do we do it better? Because Europe's been able to figure it out. Now, again, European countries, a little bit smaller than the US. And I get that we've got some, infrastructure that we'd have to put in place to make it happen. But how do we do it better? Because it is happening better in other places. So that's what sustainability, how do we use our resources to continue to have them for future generations? And then when you look at conservation, okay, it's to care and protect resources so that they may be around for the future. All right, so let's look at the definition. Seeks the sustainable use of nature by humans for activities such as hunting, logging, or mining. So if we're going to mine, how do we do it sustainably? If we're going to log, which is logging and tearing down trees for paper and all those kind of things, right? How do we got to plant trees to replace it, right? So all of those things, we have to think about how do we conserve doing those things, right? These two topics are underneath the umbrella of sustainability. All right. And then preservation means protecting nature from humans. So preservation means we're not going to be conserving it. We are actually maintaining it and keeping it away from our use altogether. We're preserving it. So you may have heard terms like a game preserve or a national park preserve, where you just don't get to, you can go and maybe look, but we keep it wild, right? You keep it wild and you don't let humans use it. Okay. So that's the major difference between those two topics. Conserve means we're going to maintain it and try to replenish it, right? And if we have, for instance, for hunting, for anybody that's a hunter, all right, sometimes in years where hunting season opens, you have more, let's say deer that you can kill this season than you could last season because they're doing a count, right? And they're saying, hey, we got more than we need this year, so you can go after more than $2 or whatever it is that you're going after, right? Same thing for birds. All right. So that's where they can kind of go, okay, it's going to fluctuate depending on how well the year went. If we had enough babies born, so on and so forth, right? Like there's rules for that. And that's part of that conservation effort to allow for the hunting to happen, because it's kind of good. It's good for that, because if we have too many of that species, then they will overrun the system, right? The capacity of it will not be good, right? So you need that, but you don't want to overwhelm the system and take too many out to where they can't replenish themselves. So that's what conservation is about. Preservation is like, nope, no humans, thanks. I don't need any humans. Okay. And then the strategies that governments do are where the government puts in for that, right? They have a balanced approach, and then they have these debt for nature and ecotourism places. So like the Galapagos Islands are an ecotourism spot, right? They have lots of rules and regulations put in place. There's only so many people that are allowed on the islands every year. Because of that, there's only so many places you can go because they want to keep it as pristine as they can, right? They can't just say anybody and everybody can come to the Galapagos. Okay. They don't have the infrastructure for that. I can tell you that. The hotels and places that we stayed at, like we shut down, I think we turned the lights off one time because we overwhelmed the system with our 40 people that we came with. I think there was like maybe there was 25 of us. I don't know. There was a large group of us in the bus. And so they just don't have the infrastructure for it. They don't even have buses that are big enough on the islands to haul. So like the big buses, they didn't have those. They put a whole bunch of our kids in these tiny little vans. They put our suitcases in the back of a pickup truck, and they put 4 of the adults in somebody's car. And I was like, what is happening? Like, they just don't have the infrastructure to haul that many people. They can't just have cruise ships show up at the Galapagos Islands. So you can't do that. That's not something you do. So there are certain places, so it's an ecotourism site. And you just can't show up in droves. Like, that's just not a thing that happens there. So anyways, difference between those two things. So specifically your governance, international trade agreements that give preference to or require that companies they buy from use sustainable practices. They put it in the rules. Say, hey, if we're going to use your stuff, you've got to be sustainable in some capacity, right? They limit where you can hunt, where you can log, where you can fish. Governments and non-government organizations. So your NGOs are like your nonprofit organizations. They teach local communities how to protect. There's a lot of that going on in the Galapagos. School children are being taught how to protect their island. Kids that go there, our kids that were there, were taught how to protect the islands and what they're doing to protect the tortoise and the sea lion and so on. Okay, so just education in general, trying to teach locals how to, not be so global and so modern that you ruin this beauty that you have. And then your balanced approach, right? This second piece, approach to the extraction of resources. So sustainable companies limit how much they extract, okay? So that the rainforest is given time to regenerate. And it takes more time to do that. It's not a fast thing. And that's hard for companies to do because you guys live in a world where everything is, when did I get my test done? When is this? When is this? It's all instant. And this is about balanced approach takes a little bit more time, right? And saying, hey, we're only going to take this much and then we're going to let it regrow. And we're only going to take this much and we're going to let it regrow. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes a lot of things. Okay. So the example that I have here is sustainable logging companies only remove a small number of trees, allowing for the forest. They do that in the southern part of the US. I think it's in Georgia, where because of COVID, there was an uptick in the making of cardboard boxes, right? Because everybody was buying stuff online to have it shipped to their house. They couldn't go to stores, but they were still delivering, right? So there was an incredible uptick in the making of cardboard boxes to get things to and from, especially here in the United States, because of COVID, because we were no longer shopping in stores and now we're ordering things online. And that was kind of on the rise anyways, because I admit I'm a shopper that likes to shop online because I hate going to a brick and mortar store, like an actual building. So when I'm shopping for Christmas, when I'm shopping, it's like, oh, I'll just order it on Amazon, right? So because of that Amazon has created this kind of conundrum where we've got to be able to produce cardboard boxes. And there are companies that produce cardboard boxes for companies like Amazon. And so that's been a real challenge to keep up with demand for making something to ship, right? To making a box to ship. All right. So the next one is really kind of a cool one. And this one's probably one of the most important one. It is literally a debt for nature swap, meaning that, look at your first step here. It says the US says 1 million of debt is canceled. All right. Of the debtor government. So let's say Costa Rica has debt that they owe to the United States. And we say, we're going to cancel $1 million of that. All right. And we will put $200,000 into, we'll take that and make it $200,000 into environmental projects for your country. All right. And you save a swath of your land to not be messed with. All right. So that's what this is saying. The creditor government cancels or reduces the debt owed by the debtor government and an agreed amount, for example, US $200,000, that would have otherwise serviced the debt. So instead of paying the debt, now you're going to earmark it for environmental projects. That's a debt for nature swap. And it's happening a lot in your Latin American countries. Okay. And that's one way that we're saving it. The last piece is ecotourism. I mentioned this before with the Galapagos, right? Responsible travel. Companies are getting on board with this. National Geographic has a company that they work with called Lindblad Expeditions that's completely their what do you call it? Their carbon footprint is free. They locally source their things. They don't tie up on shore. They're very mindful about where they're going, the kind of fuel they're using, all kinds of things, right? So it's all about this is a growing trend of ecotourism. Ecotourism tends to cost a little bit more because to be responsible, to have environmentally friendly ships, cruise ships that go places and don't use plastic and all that kind of stuff, it takes a little bit more to run, a little bit more money. Okay. So responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the well-being of the local people so that they don't get overrun by modern pop culture, touristy traps kind of things. And involves the interpretation and education. So if you go on an eco tour, you're going to get an education about how things are happening, right? It's not just oh, look at this historical, blah, 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 blah. And you get to see it buy a popsicle and move on. It's going to be, how can, this is how we're doing it. This is how we're going to maintain this area, right? And it builds awareness. That's its main goal too, building awareness of an endangered species or what have you. Okay. All right. That's it for now. You've learned a little bit about the environmental piece, and you'll have an article to read after this.